Let's see, I'm just supposed to say, don't be anxious about anything.
Hey, guys, how are you? Pastor Jason here. We're just checking to make sure we're going live. Yep, looks like we're live. Well, hey, everybody. We just wanted to say hello, and we're going to be doing a Q&A here with my lovely wife, Brandy. And, um, and so we've got some questions that you guys had about marriage because we're doing this series that we're calling The Family Table. Um, and so, did you have any thoughts or questions before we even started? Did you have anything you needed to say?
I miss Gary. Um,
You like
I,
Gary when he does this better than me?
yes,
But
I get it could be awkward though.
Gary
So
and I aren't married. That'd be
yeah,
weird.
I have it on good authority though. I appreciate the kind words on Sunday, but Nikki thinks he's very pretty. Especially when he's carrying in hot chicken bags. I think she would agree
Yeah,
with that
hot chicken. Yeah.
wholeheartedly. So
So we are doing this series called The Family Table, and which is just about like how God has designed the family and designed the home, and how it should be, um, managed, and how it should look, how it's going to look like Christ. And so we let you guys know about this Q&A a little while ago, and we've got some questions here. And I thought, just like Gary and I usually do, we'll walk through these, and we'll look for your comments and questions. If you're not making sense about something, you can feel free to ask, and we're trying to monitor those as well. All right. And so, question number one was pretty simple. It was during COVID or any other time where we maybe didn't have like childcare. How did we stay connected and respond to each other's unique needs? Um, so obviously that can be a problem for those of you who are parents and have kids in the house, trying to find time to be alone or trying to find time where you can like just have a conversation can be really hard. And I think Brandy and I joke sometimes like, you know what, babe, don't worry about it. We'll finish this conversation in like 18 years when they're out of the house because the kids keep interrupting us. So let me let you answer that first. What are some ways that we've tried to stay connected and respond to each other's needs when we didn't have the opportunity maybe to like leave the house or
yeah,
go on dates or whatever?
no, and then still having small children in the house, that's definitely difficult. Some practical ways that we have done it is we'll put the kids to early maybe and have dinner, just the two of us. Um, and maybe that means eating dinner at 9 o'clock, which I wouldn't recommend every night, but doing it occasionally for the sake of your marriage is good. Sometimes just coffee while the kids are napping and sitting on the back porch, or having a bonfire after they go to bed, are some ways we've done it. When you don't have family nearby, when you're working a lot, you have small kids, like we have definitely gone through spurts where we struggled with this and it showed. You don't Little things set you off and you clash more easily when you don't have that time, where you just get to sit and talk about nothing. So it is very important, and it's essential to be intentional about it because it's not just going to happen. And I think, as a side note, this is where I would encourage those that are able, um, to maybe that you have grandkids, or your kids are out of the house or whatever, you have older kids and stuff. If you see a younger couple in particular, or a couple with younger kids in the house, that you have a good relationship, obviously that has to be there. But to offer to maybe watch the kids for them. We've had people do this for you, and you're worth your weight in gold and then some. Um,
Are you angling for babysitters?
no,
Is that what you're?
we've been blessed with a lot of babysitters of late, and I'm thankful for that. I have a babysitter for a week this next week, and I am like counting the
Thanks, Nana
hours.
Pops. Yeah,
Yes.
thanks, Nana Pops.
So we're very thankful for that. Another thing too that just came to mind that we've done is trade off with friends. Um,
Oh yeah,
so we have
I
friends that
forgot.
we're like, yeah, and sometimes it just means squeezing in an hour here or there or whatever. But we're like, hey, you take your kids on Tuesday night, and I'll take, you take mine or whatever on Thursday. So trading off, just kind of thinking outside the box sometimes. But as far as COVID and stuff, that's obviously been taught everybody to be a little more flexible and think outside the box. So doing more things at home. We have friends that are really good about playing games together. Jason and I don't do well with that. We have to play together. It's better
On
for
the
our
same team.
marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Um,
bad losers.
so that's just us personally, but just finding something that you have in common, that you can do together to connect, and in that way, I guess.
Yeah. So I just said, first of all, I think um, mentioning that every relationship and every marriage is unique, and so it's important to make note of that at the beginning. Everyone is different, and each person in the marriage is going to be different also and have different needs and whatnot. And so those are probably not one size fits all
Right.
Answers, but they're certainly helpful. Um, the second, I do appreciate implicit in the question is the recognition that staying close and staying connected and responding to each other's needs is essential in marriage. And so one of the things I tell people, like when I do premarital counseling, is like you can never stop dating each other. You have to keep like wooing. I think is that didn't they use that word when we were
Maybe it's
when we were doing our premarital counseling? You have to continue to woo your partner and do what you can to continue to kindle that relationship. And so yeah, when it's possible that to do date nights and schedule time together, etc. All the things she said, that we just are very intentional about scheduling time, whether that's dinner after the kids go to bed, or like doing a fire in the fire pit in the backyard, or even just like saying, hey, let's just spend some time this evening. I think that the real issue is intentionality, recognizing your spouse's needs and planning ways to help meet them. We tend to think of romance as like spontaneous gestures, but sometimes the most romantic and loving thing you can do is plan ahead, get something set on a calendar, and make that happen. So setting aside time shows you care. So the second question we had is good book recommendations for the following: preparing for marriage, going through rough period, or just do some Bible studies together. So I've got like 3 or 4 books here. I don't know that they all fit all those categories, but Wayne Mack has a book called Preparing for Marriage God's Way, and I think that's a good book for preparing for marriage. Tim and Kathy Keller have a book called The Meaning of Marriage, which is really excellent. If you've read Tim Keller before, it's very thoughtful. Sacred Marriage is one that you and I read, right? Did we read that for our premarital
No,
counseling?
I read that when we first started dating.
Okay, yeah. So Sacred Marriage. And then Pastor Gary mentioned a book called When Sinners Say I Do by Dave Harvey. I've not read that, but Pastor Gary, I'm just talking with him this week. He recommends that one, so I take his word for it. Do you have any others?
I know one we did years ago was The Love Dare, and I can't remember.
Pastor Gary asked me about this, and I was like, I've never heard of that book.
It was a long time ago.
Apparently I have, and I've read it, so
it was over 10 years ago, so but I can't remember who did, but it's called The Love Dare, and it has like a workbook that you can go through it. I think one of the things that come to mind for me too is just anytime you're in the Word together is always a good thing. You can certainly look for something that maybe fits your particular situation that you're struggling with, but a strong marriage is always a good thing to focus on and affects the rest of your family. But just picking up Proverbs or whatever and going through that together, and I think a lot of questions will naturally flow anytime you're working through that. So
yeah. Third question is, when do you know, or how do you know it's time to seek counseling? I'm assuming they mean like outside of friends. They mean like a counselor, go see a pastor, or go talk to like a professional. Would you assume?
Yeah.
What do you think?
My initial thought would be when you kind of come to a point where you feel like things aren't moving forward, like you are talking and you feel like nothing's changing or improving in whatever your struggles are. At that point, I would probably seek counseling.
Yeah. Yes, I would agree there. It's probably too late, but certainly if not being together has crossed your mind, that's probably time. It's past time to seek counseling. And then I would just say two things about counseling. One is that your pastors are hopefully good counselors. I do not think that's a strength that I have. Like, I've always told people, like, I would be happy to counsel you if we can't sort of get to the bottom of the issue in 2 or 3 meetings, though. It's probably time to move to a professional counselor, but a pastor is a good place to start. And then the second thing would be that professional counselors are certainly, um, they're not always inexpensive, um, but the cost is saving your marriage sometimes. So
Right.
that would be a
Cheaper in the long run.
cheaper in the long run. Yeah, exactly.
And I would think to me, something that just came to mind, um, if you're considering, hey, maybe we need counseling, that's
you need
probably,
counseling.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
a
good
time
point.
to seek that. And I would say, even if one partner thinks that you need counseling, that I would respect and love the other one enough to say, okay. And if you go and, that one or two sessions, get some kinks worked out, whatever, not something you have to do indefinitely. It's going to look different for everybody. But yeah, I would say if that thought's crossing your mind, it's definitely worth heavily considering.
Yeah, agree. Okay, number 3. What do you do when couples come to an impasse? What do you do when you cannot compromise? So, this is a good question. It's actually a topic that, uh, for this coming Sunday's message, is something I talk about. So, I will often ask couples when I'm doing premarital counseling that exact same question. What do you do when you come to an impasse and you cannot compromise? And like inevitably, every single time they say, "Oh, we'll just work it out. We'll just like compromise." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand the question. What do you do when you cannot compromise? You cannot get past it. What then? Who makes the decision?" Um, and so this is where the idea, I think, of husbands being the head of the home and wives lovingly submitting to their husband's leadership comes in. I encourage people not to reach this point if they can help it. But there will almost certainly come a time when you'll have to make a decision that you just can't agree on. And in that case, I do believe Scripture tells us it becomes the husband's responsibility to decide what's best for the family. And as I said last Sunday, if he steers the ship into the reef and sets fire to the sails, then he is accountable to God for the decision he made. And and so, let me give you some advice for husbands when we think about this. Only use this authority on issues that serve the best interest of your wife and family. Never use it for your own pleasure or your own plan. Okay? And so this is not about like, I want to go out with the guys and I don't care what you think, I'm the man. That's not the way you use this. Second, I would say instances where you are literally at an impasse and the husband has to use his headship are exceedingly rare. And I don't know that I could name one in our marriage. Um, but I would encourage you, if you feel like, I would encourage you to humbly reconsider your position before ever invoking your role as leader and head of the family. Um, God gave you your wife as a helpmate, and her advice should be esteemed above all others. If she is adamantly opposed to a decision you're about to make, that should cause you to be very leery about moving forward without her. So unless you can like chapter and verse this from Scripture, in other words, unless you can say, "Honey, I love you, but you are sinful if we don't. If we're, it is a sin if we don't move forward." Um, Unless you know for certain that she's sinning by not doing whatever, agreeing with you, I would probably not invoke my headship here. Um, for wives, Tim and Kathy Keller, that book I was just mentioning, this is part of the advice they give. They say that wives should never be merely compliant or passive, but work to resource and empower their husband. And so one of the great ironies of about men is that as emotionally stunted as we tend to be with regard to like communicating our needs and thoughts and emotions, We really do have emotional needs, and we need one of those is that we need our wives to respect us and to think highly of us. We're just sort of fragile that way. We want you to think we're wise. We want you to think that we're doing a good job of leading the family. And so if you're just simply being passive and we feel like you're just going along for the ride when we make a decision, that actually makes that decision harder for us. I have a sports metaphor. Men like to work in a team, and we want to feel like our teammates have our back and support us. And so, wives, you are our teammate. So look for ways to like resource and empower us and our leadership. And this will almost, and I would just say this also, that will almost certainly not be verbal. In other words, saying, honey, I trust you is fine, good. But probably that's not the way we're most going to feel that. You know what I mean? So we don't need you to say it so much as we need you to show it. So ladies, if you have come to this impasse, I think it would be the loving thing to do is to follow his lead, and then also like really try to empower him in that. One last caveat, as I said on Sunday, ladies, you don't owe your husband or anyone else unconditional obedience. Gentlemen, she does not owe you unconditional obedience. And if that's what your husband is asking you to do, if what he's asking you to do is sinful, you're not under any obligation to follow his lead. It's possible to not follow his lead respectfully. I just talked about we have fragile egos, so you don't have to blow him out of the water like you idiot. Here's why. But if you think he's biblically wrong, you should not follow him into sin. So, anything you would add there? Because you mentioned in our conversation before that doesn't always have to be an impasse, doesn't have to be like a life-altering decision.
Yeah, I think sometimes, especially for women, there's like some frustration that can come from like more daily stuff. So if you feel like there's just no resolution that can be reached in a situation in that regard, I think sometimes maybe there's some hardening of hearts issues for whatever reason. And I would say that whoever's asking the question probably is the one that has the softest heart. So I would just encourage you, you can't control how the other person responds or reacts to a situation, how they handle it. So for you to make the wise biblical choice and handle it the best way you can, certainly praying for your spouse, that their heart would be softened, and that y'all would be able to come together and find more common ground. And that God would just give you patience to endure that and figure out a better way to handle whatever that circumstance may be.
Yeah, that's good. Number 4, what do you do when you disagree about fundamental beliefs? Do you want to answer or do you want me to?
You can start this one.
Let me start this
Because I would say don't marry them and stop there.
Yeah, well, that's actually where I would start. Number 1, there's a reason the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 6:14 that we ought not be unequally yoked. Believers ought not marry unbelievers. Because, as Paul goes on to explain in that chapter, what fellowship or what relationship does light have with darkness? So I know every person has a story about some couple that, he was a Christian and she wasn't, or she was a Christian and he wasn't, and it worked out for them. Everybody has at least one story like that. My grandparents were one of those stories. But from my experience, for every one story that it does work out, I could probably tell you 10 that it did not. And the reason we don't hear those stories as often is because they've left the church and we don't have their testimony anymore. And so my first piece of advice, which is really straight from the Bible, is if you disagree with them about some fundamental beliefs of marriage, of faith rather, don't marry them in the first place. Of course, there may be some people listening for whom the cat's already out of the bag, and they're married to an unbeliever. Now what? This is where I would go back to what we talked about on Sunday, what we're going to talk about this coming Sunday, and that is just the biblical role of husband and wife. If the believing spouse is the husband, if you're a believer and she is an unbeliever, you should seek to lovingly encourage her to attend church with you, to read her Bible or read your Bible, together. And I've never once met a wife who didn't welcome that spiritual leadership from her husband. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm, certainly not gonna say it will never happen. But I've never met one. If the believing spouse is the wife, Peter in 1 Peter 3 speaks to this specifically, and he says that wives who are married to unbelieving husbands should, insofar as he doesn't require you to sin, follow his lead. And by your Christ-like example, then you may very well lead him to the Lord. As I said, this is exactly what happened to my grandparents. I don't know why she married my grandfather. He wasn't a believer. And she just lovingly continued to go to church and do all these things. And he became a believer and was one of the strongest believers I've ever known. And so, but so far, I'm assuming that fundamental belief is faith in Christ. If it is, don't marry them. And if you're already married, we can follow the advice that I just mentioned. But I suppose it's possible for there to be some other beliefs that don't have to do with your faith, or some other fundamental issue. My answer then would depend largely on what the issue is. So, but I would offer much of the same advice. If the issue is really, truly fundamental and neither of you are willing to compromise, initially I would say don't marry that person. If that comes out before marriage, and I would really advise everyone, especially young people that are listening, if I marry you, I require you to go through premarital counseling. I would encourage everyone to do that. And a good premarital counselor will find these issues before that. If you find some fundamental issue that you cannot agree on, I think that there's a lot of wisdom to say that may not be the best person for you to marry.
Can I jump in and
say, yeah, go ahead.
Don't be naive enough to think it's going to change.
Oh gosh, no.
I would just throw that in, because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. You have to really think, can I raise children? Can I run a house? Can I live going to church every Sunday without my spouse? Or whatever the situation may be. Don't ever assume it's going to change.
Yeah. I tell couples all the time in premarital counseling, tell me what arguments you've had so far. And they'll, what are the topics rather? And I'll say, those are essentially the same arguments you're going to have the rest of your marriage. I joke Brandy and I have only had 3 arguments ever. We've had each of them 50 or 60 times, but they're the same 3 things. I mean, it gets a little different when kids come in or whatever. That, I guess that's different, but so yeah, I would agree. Don't assume that it's going to change. Sure. I was just trying to think what are some fundamental issues that might not be whether they're a believer or not. So if Brandy and I were engaged and she was, I found out she was just a committed Pentecostal. She just really believed the gifts of the Spirit continued today, and she was not going to compromise on that. I don't believe that. I believe differently than that. I'm a cessationist, and I don't think I'm gonna bend there. And so I would have to very seriously, we'd have to have very serious conversations. How fundamental is that to our relationship that I'm never going to take her or be a member of a church where that's practiced, or that she might, do that in her private worship or something like that. Can I live with that? Questions about how to raise children. If she were totally into what's it called, free range parenting, just let them run wild. And I know you guys think that's what we do. We're really desperately trying to keep our children in check. We just can't. But if she were committed to that, that you'd have to think can I marry this person? You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying you couldn't. I'm saying you have to decide when it says when we say a fundamental issue, you have to decide what's fundamental to you. I think Scripture just says obviously our faith, our faith in Christ, but we have to sort of think about that a little bit differently. What happens if those fundamental issues are only discovered after the marriage starts? And it's going to sound like a broken record here, but I think we go back to our roles in the marriage and saying like, husbands, you have to just really lovingly die to yourself and lead your wife, and wives, you have to lovingly submit to your husband's leadership, right? Um,
And
and
I would say that's significantly easier when you're united from the beginning. So again, going back to before you're married, obviously, all the more reason to find someone that can be your spiritual leader, um, and that you trust and agree with, because it's a lot easier if the situation arises for you to yield to when you know they have your best interest in heart, and when you're having disagreements that you can go back to scripture and you're on that same page, and whether it's parenting or whatever the situation may be, you know, at the end of the day, the goal of our marriage we agree on is that we want to honor and glorify Christ in it. And being united in that makes a huge difference in how we approach a lot of aspects, every aspect of our life.
yeah, absolutely. Number 5, what does the Bible say? So we sort of answered this already, but what does the Bible say about how to manage a marriage when one person is saved or gets saved and the other is not? How does that look compared to the biblical model of marriage? I think we answered it like sort of, um, you shouldn't, if you know beforehand, you should not marry someone who's an unbeliever. Um, but I just want to encourage you, those of you who are in the situation, maybe you discovered after the fact that they weren't actually a believer, or you got saved after the marriage started. I want to encourage you to pray for your spouse, your unbelieving spouse. I want to encourage you, whether husband or wives, they will see no better witness than to Christ than you, and so continue to pray for them, and know, that the Lord answers prayers. I think that we are saved for a reason. We get saved for a reason, and many times that reason is to affect generational change in our lives. And so, if you're out there now and you're like, my husband, my wife, she's not a believer, he's not a believer, and it's just like really, I would just encourage you. We don't believe in like name it and claim it kind of faith, but like, I really do believe the Lord wants your spouse to be married, and like to be saved rather. And so like, man, pray that in faith. God, save my spouse. Like, do whatever you got to do, and then for you, continue to be that Christ-like example.
And I would say on a practical level, just um, try to remove any hindrance that would be a deterrent for them. Um, Whether that means like going out of your way to not inconvenience them because you're going to church. So maybe that means altering your schedule in other ways and coming upon agreed times. Okay, well, we can have family time at this time, but I want to be at church on Sunday mornings. Or like, and just talking that through, making sure they're clear, managing expectations and things like that. So,
Yeah.
'cause I think there
Yeah.
can be some frustration, that comes from that when you have different visions on how things should look.
Yeah, I agree. So, when you come to an impasse, or when one one spouse is a believer and the other is not, I think it comes down, really to living like Christ in front of that person. Like you said, that sometimes means like understanding like they don't love that I go to church every Sunday, so I'm going to make sure to set aside time some other time of the week to spend with them, or whatever. So, nagging never works. If your husband is an unbeliever, I've never met a husband that wants to be like nagged to death. If your wife is an unbeliever, um, like I said, I've found that most of the time wives are a little more open to like going to church and things like that when their husband's a believer. But even if they're not, just being a jerk to her and like forcing her to come and stuff like that is not gonna do it. So, what advice do you have? Oh, this will be good. This is for you. You can answer this one first. What advice do you have for transitional life stages? So, like, toddlers in the house, so you don't have a lot of time together, or um, maybe you're an empty nester. Who knows? Wouldn't that be nice? Or new career transitions, or something like that. Um, what is your advice for transitional periods in your marriage?
I think one thing a lot of us have learned from current circumstances is to remain flexible, to find joy in each stage and look for
Oh, you
things
mean
to.
like because of COVID?
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
I'm not gonna lie, I had a pretty good schedule going before this. Um, but no, just trying to be flexible and keeping those lines of communication open. I think it's helpful if you try to enjoy each stage that you're in and not necessarily rush to the next one. I know that's something we've tried to be intentional about doing. As frustrating as small children are, sometime they're not going to be there one day. They're going to be off at college or in their own homes or whatever. So just trying to enjoy each stage um, that you're in, I think, is huge. And like I know for us at the stage we're in, we try to be intentional each month and look in the calendar and find a night for us to have a date night, whether that's at home or out or whatever. And then we try to find a time that maybe Jason takes Stella out and I take Ben out, or whatever that may look like. I think, when you get close to that point where empty nesters, we're far from that. Um, Staying connected, I from stories I've heard of other people, is sometimes your kids move out and you don't even like really know the person because you've been like so busy parenting that you've not invested in each other. So I know that's one of the things that we try to like make sure we're staying connected, and that it's not all about our kids. As much as we love them, like having a healthy marriage is what's best for them.
Yeah.
And making sure that that stays a priority
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. So one of the things, Pastor Gary, I'm sure will talk about some of this when he does his series or his part of the series in parenting. But one of the things that I've told women before, like moms before, I'll say like the most important person in your life outside of Jesus is not your kids, it's your husband. Mm-hmm. And they'll say like, no, my kids. No, actually, it's your husband. And so yeah, like empty nesters, I know that is a thing that like you've had kids in the house for 20 years and you sort of defined yourselves around being parents together. And then the kids are gone and you do feel like you're in the house with a stranger. I'm willing to try it, babe. As soon as our kids are out of the house, we can try that. I do think one thing to remember is in work on is you can't let the circumstances you're in right now be the defining thing of your relationship. Like, yes, you should enjoy those circumstances. Like, I love that the kids are still little and they have an 8:30 bedtime. You know what I mean? Or these little things. But then you can't let the circumstances you're in now define your relationship, because when those circumstances change, then you feel like I don't even know this person, or that the relationship has changed so fundamentally. So you got to build your relationship on to one another on Christ, who never changes. And then I would say in all things I would encourage grace and mercy. Mm-hmm. Everybody handles situations differently. Like we've just found that Brandy and I, for instance, grieve very differently. Like I want to go on, like get back to a normal routine, like ASAP after tragedy or loss, and Brandy like wants to dwell on it. And so you have to, that's a transition, and you have to like give that person some room to do that. You can't expect them to transition and just like you do.
I think that's processing in general too. Just how you handle different things. You have to recognize that different people are going to process things differently, and neither is necessarily wrong. But you have to allow that room for them to process whatever the situation may be.
Yeah, whatever the change is. Yeah. It's good. And also that things won't always be this way. Like when we first came to this church, we still lived in Akron, right? In Canton. North Canton, really. And so that was like a hour plus drive. I was on the road for like 3 hours a day.
On a good day, yeah.
On a good day. And, Lord forbid if there's traffic or anything, accident or something like that. And so we just had to say, like, look, for the next 6 months or whatever, until we find the house that we want, or, decide where we're going to live here in Willowick, it's going to be different. And we just have to, like, it'll be okay. This won't be forever. We won't always go. I mean, even when we bought our house before we moved, like I lived in the house by myself and like slept on the floor for a month and saw the kids only on the weekends, basically. Or like, one night a week, Brandy would like meet me halfway just because the schedule was what it was and it wasn't going to work out any other way. But we knew that that was really temporary.
Yeah.
And now, I'm home every night. So, home most nights. So, what are some habits or practices that foster and encourage emotional and spiritual intimacy? What do you think? What do we do?
I think this is where it goes back. It's helpful to me. I'm the planner. Some of us not so much in this regards, but sitting down and like having a set time, and sometimes it gets changed. That's especially with the nature of your job. But knowing that you have that to look forward to is helpful for me. So just that intentionality of that. I think, like I said earlier, anytime you're doing a study and you're in the Word together is naturally going to foster conversations, which foster intimacy and closeness, and just making sure you're on the same page for those kind of things. So I think anytime you can have fun together is always a good thing. Um, hopefully you enjoy doing some of the same things together. We try to go to an Ohio State football game when they're playing every fall if we can, and just I don't know, we go to concerts, things like that we can do that we both enjoy. And I'm trying to think what else we do.
We like to cook.
Yeah.
Or we like to like try new foods.
Try new recipes and stuff. Yeah. I think a huge one for us of late just has been serving together. Has been a huge thing for us. And we've really grown closer together in that. And there are a lot of things that I can't necessarily, I'm not going to be on, the elders or thankfully go to board meetings and fun things like that. But the fact that we get to be on the worship team together has been great. And we're very thankful that we've had friends in supporting us with helping with our kids and stuff so that we can do that. But I know for us, like just anything you can do to serve together, I think it's beneficial.
Well, and like we met in a Bible study, and I knew even then that I was going to go into the ministry, and so that's been a part of our life, forever. Mm-hmm. And so we've just really built that feels really natural to us. So that might require a little more work for some people. Mm-hmm. You maybe are like, oh, I've never actually been a part of a small group Bible study or something like that. But I think you said it already. Intentionality is the biggest thing. Intimacy never happens on accident. It always takes effort. Good marriages require work. And so just being intentional about building intimacy is the only way it's ever gonna grow in your marriage. And obviously that will just look different for everybody. You know what I mean? So some friends of ours went kayaking together, and I'm like, mm-hmm. I have zero interest in doing that at all. Like I really don't want to do that. She's like, oh, kayaking. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go with my girlfriends. It's good. You guys go. That's not something that would work for me. But if Brandy wants to like play guitar and sing, and we can, we could do that. So we plan date nights. Mm-hmm. Even if it's just after the kids go to bed, we set money aside for babysitters when we can actually have babysitters. We plan time away together. Like I said, our kids are going to go see her parents tomorrow, actually. And we're going to be a whole week. And I mean, she's got work to do. I've got work to do, obviously. But still, we'll make sure that we spend some of that time together. We do we go to Bible conferences together, right? Last year we went to 2. Maybe last year we went to 1. Year before that we went to 1. Anyway, we went to like 2 within a year. That was really awesome. That TGC one, especially, like we got to. It was just her and I, and we got to like be fed the word, but also got to go out to dinner and just enjoy each other's company. Complete a conversation without the kids. I was just saying one of the things we do is we just talk about our plans for the future. We'll dream together, and the house we're in right now is maybe not our forever house, and so Brandy will like get on realtor.com and look at houses that she likes, mostly houses we're never going to be able to afford, but we talk about vacations and plan those things out. we talk and have conversations so that we're on the same page about the kids,
Mhm.
so that, like, hey, the kids need to stop watching so many shows because they're not having a good attitude. Okay, that's good to know, because this morning when I was at home and Brandy wasn't there, and they were like, we want to watch shows, and I go, no, your mom said no, and they're like, we didn't think you'd know that.
Yeah.
And so all that promotes intimacy. The thing that you said is most important is just to encourage your spouse to study the word and grow in your faith. Sometimes that's together, that we would do Bible studies together, pray together. We should do that. But also, in a weird way, allowing your spouse time to do Bible study by themselves or in a group is good. So, like, I know that there are nights, there's at least one night of the week where Brandy's going to be in Bible study. I'm going to have to take care of the kids, put them in bed, give them dinner, put them in bed, and stuff like that. Well, that doesn't feel like it should build intimacy, but it does, because if I'm moving towards Christ, here we go. If I'm moving towards Christ and she's moving towards Christ, well, eventually, like, we meet at Christ. Do you see what I'm saying? And so, practically speaking, just making sure that you're helping your spouse grow in their spiritual journey is helpful, even if that's not in the same Bible study as you.
Yeah.
So, this is my favorite one. What's the maximum number of rock, paper, scissors ties before you just let the kids decide? So give us some. That's from a close friend, and they know us well. So give them some back.
I was like, this makes me laugh because it's how well somebody knows. Well, I think for one, it shows our personalities, because a lot of people, if they have, maybe decision making that's not, life altering, just dinner, what have you. A lot of people would be loving and maybe share and take turns or whatever, but this is where our competitive nature.
You get to go.
Right, our competitive nature comes out. So yeah, we'll play, and we make our kids do it too. Play rock, paper, scissors. But the cool thing, actually, I was thinking about this. Over the years, it's definitely become more loving than competitive. Because before it'd be more about, like, I want to go where I want to go. Now, like, if I win, I'll be like, all right, let's go get Mexican. Or if Jason wins, he'll be like, we'll go get what you want, kind of thing. So, not always, but sometimes.
If it's
so that's nice. We're at least, heading in the right direction.
So how many before we just let the kids go? Well, see, you underestimate our rock, paper, scissors ability.
Yeah, I was like, we really don't tie that much.
Good. We should do one of those tournaments or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, but we make a lot of decisions that are not important, like where we're gonna go for dinner.
Yeah.
We literally will make them with rock, paper, scissors, because why get in an argument or
right? And I think that goes back that for us that works. It's obviously not everybody's thing, but having fun, like, just make a joke out of it, laugh together. But yeah, there's been many rock, paper, scissors thrown in our house. So,
how do we communicate? How should you communicate dissatisfaction, encouragement, and appreciation? I'm assuming 3 different things.
Yeah.
How should you communicate? I'll go first. Dissatisfaction, carefully. Read the room. You know what I mean? She comes home from a long day of work, or I come home from work and the kids have been less than stellar. I probably can let some of my dissatisfaction go, right? Take the temperature of the room. Make certain that what you're about to express is essential. So I'll try not to be petty, and I'll give you an example. Let's see, I'm going to be petty.
Yeah,
So
I was like, I can't wait to hear this.
We live here in Willowick, and if you've been in any house in Willowick, like, we have stairs that go up to our bedroom is upstairs, and the stairs, they're like wooden, and Brandy, like, puts stuff on the stairs to, like, carry up later or whatever, and I had ankle surgery a few years ago. I'm not super steady on them on my already, and it drives me crazy. Stop putting stuff on the stairs. But overall, all the ways that you love me and take care of me and encourage me, complaining about the fact that you left your shoes or packages or something like that on the stairs, I could probably let that go. So that's dissatisfaction. That's how I have handled it. What do you?
Yeah. I think the key word in that question is communicate. That you're talking about it, and sometimes maybe it's just letting it go, and realizing if that needs to happen. But if it's something that's continually happening and it's bothering you, whether it's a small detail about where you throw your backpack when you come in or your shoes, um, or whatever the situation may be, that you actually talk about it, and at the end of the day, you're like, really, is that the worst thing in the world, as frustrating as it may be to you? But I think the main thing is communication. When you stop talking to each other, that's when the real problem begins.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think you're right in saying that there's a time and place for all of that and choosing that appropriately. If you're really, really mad, maybe taking some time to cool off. I know there's definitely times that like he would rather just hash things out and be done with them.
Now, immediately. Why
Yes.
would we not
And
do
I'm
it?
like, no, I need a minute. I just want to process it or whatever. Um, so sometimes, you
I'll
know,
go take a walk.
yeah. And it depends too. Like for him, if he's got to get up and it's Saturday night and we've had an argument about something and we have to get up and lead worship and he's preaching the next morning, like I got to get over myself and realize that that's really hard for him to do, to go on and deal with this and whatever. So being considerate of where the other person is and their needs and the situation. And so it's kind of hard to give an exact
Yeah. No,
answer, but
it's
it's like all these questions,
as all these.
unfortunately,
Yeah, it
there's,
just
yeah.
depends.
So just being considerate of all of that.
When it comes to encouragement, how do you give encouragement?
Hot chocolate chip cookies.
For me, that is true. Tacos.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I think just being loving, like, for me, I make sure to, or I certainly try to never speak ill of my husband. I think working in an industry that tends to be a lot of women, you often hear some not kind things about spouses.
she's a
Um,
dental hygienist.
yeah, so there's very often, most offices I've worked in have been primarily women, if not all. Um, and it makes me sad. Some of the things people say about their husbands, like even if they're true, don't air them to everybody. Um, so I think just always trying to speak with you in high regard, speaking to our children, making sure they realize how hard he works and what he does, and because they take things for granted, and I want them to love and appreciate and respect him as well. So, you know, how I speak of him to them, as well as how I speak to him in front of them, all factor into that. I think in encouraging you, because they can certainly be seen as discouraging if you do the opposite. I think realizing I think we read this one in our marriage hunt, the five love languages. So everybody kind of receives love differently, and that's really hard because very often, oh, damn, sorry, stealing your thunder, but very often people give and receive love differently. So learning what that looks like for your spouse is really important, and being able to give it appropriately, because we definitely give and receive differently. Um,
Than each other.
then yeah. So I think knowing that goes a long way to being able to encourage the other one.
Yeah. No, I said the same thing. You have to think about how your spouse experiences dissatisfaction, encouragement, and appreciation, right? So, like, know their love language. When it comes to encouragement and appreciation, I think you should be as liberal and over the top. Like, you can't over appreciate or over encourage somebody. So, but again, you do have to know. Like I said in one of the other questions, sometimes, like for me, the encouragement will not just be I encourage you. I'm like, okay, fine, but like that doesn't really like speak to me as much as some other way of encouraging me. So, all right, last question. How do you set and work through expectations for each other in the family? Do you communicate them? Do you bundle them up? How do you?
Yes. No, I think it
Both?
depends.
You
Yeah.
both communicate?
Personally,
Yeah,
yeah. No, I mean,
sometimes.
yeah. I think I'm definitely more of the bundler. I just internalize a lot and stew over it more than I should oftentimes. Um, but I think again, that's where it comes out, like communication, like bundling it up never accomplishes anything, and that's even, I think, as parents, one of the things I realized most is how God teaches you a lot of lessons through your children. Because, like, literally, words come out of my mouth that I'm like, I bet this is like God trying to teach me, like, listen to your own words, and things you can learn from that. Um, but I think, again, just communication and being open about it, and being humble enough to realize that you may occasionally be in the wrong, not often, but and just being open to hearing, like, the other person, like, you might not have meant something some way, but how they received it, and just open to having that discussion and communicating and working through it.
Mhm. Um, yeah, I wish there were like a better way to say it, but talking about it, so communication. Um, it is important to communicate your expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be able to talk about them. Again, I would go back, if anybody's watching this that isn't married and considering marriage, like, you might not know what all your expectations are. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's some things you don't know what you don't know until you've been married. But the expectations you do have, like, you should state them at the beginning. It's really unfair to come into, to enter into the marriage and then go, oh, actually, I have all these expectations that you didn't know about until now.
Yeah.
That would be unfair of me, to you. So, but keeping them in, bottling them up. Um, there's certainly wiser times to talk about it than others,
Mm-hmm.
but generally bottling them up doesn't do any good. But I would also say this: it is important to recognize that your expectations might be wrong, like sinful. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like,
Selfish.
selfish. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's my point. So, like, if you came from a household where your mom had dinner on the table at 5:30 every night, and your dad never touched anything in the kitchen except for the food, and you walk in with that expectation, like, well, I mean, if you guys can make that work out, fine, but that's not going to work in our house. So you could be wrong. Like, you just might be like, don't be selfish. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so you have to be humble and realize you might be bringing some unhelpful or even unbiblical
Mm-hmm.
expectations that need to be brought in under the light of the word. So don't just assume you're right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, those were the questions we had for this evening. Um, and so I'm just going to look here really quickly. I've tried not to look. I don't think there were any other questions. Um,
I think one other thing that kind of comes up too that I hear, um, is sometimes people will express dissatisfaction or frustration in a marriage, because maybe things aren't what they expected them to be, or
yes.
because
Okay.
they see
Hmm.
in someone else's marriage, oh, I wish we did this, or I wish we had this, or whatever. And not that you can't work towards improving things always, but I would just strongly encourage people, like, comparison is the thief of joy. And I can't remember where I initially heard that from, but I think that's true in all aspects of life, but certainly within marriage, because it's very easy to look at your friends and family and other people around you and say, oh, well, I wish I had this situation. Everybody has their baggage. Everybody has their stuff they're dealing with. They just may not air it and you know about it.
Yeah.
But I promise you, like, anytime you live with somebody, they're going to frustrate you, no matter how wonderful they may
True.
be.
It's true.
But I mean, so comparison is the thief of joy. Like, work on making your marriage the best it can be, and hopefully one that's centered in Christ. If you're united in that, that goes a very long way, um, to making a lot of the other stuff work itself out.
Yeah, I would say too. There's actually there's a lot of research that shows people sort of think about marriage as like, I need the person that will come alongside me, and what's the movie, like, you complete me, or I need the person that's going to come
Oh,
alongside me, and, like, I mean, I read this study this week that was essentially, I'm looking for a spouse, they said, who will allow me to live my life exactly as I'm living it now and make zero changes. and they just like fit in like a puzzle piece. And that's just not
Yeah.
how marriage works. That's putting um, expectations on your spouse that are so unreasonable that they will never meet them, and you're destined for failure. Um, Marriage is the thing that most that grows you closest to Christ. I would say it's the thing that is best for your sanctification because it reveals all the ways you're sinful and selfish. Oh man,
Mm-hmm.
you're like so selfish. The first few years of marriage, especially, it's like day after day, you're discovering some other way. You're a total selfish jerk, and you're like, I didn't even know. Um, and then I would just say, like the you talked about comparison being the thief of joy. One of the things we compare ourselves to, or we think about, is the idea of like romantic love, like that our marriage would look like the movies or something like
I mean, I
that.
love Disney, but that's not real.
Right. Well, that's the point. Like actual marriage takes work. It can be ugly, and you have to hash stuff
Mm-hmm.
out, um, and it requires intentionality.
Yeah.
It's never just like you don't actually fall in love. That doesn't happen. You have to work at anything that's worth having is worth working for. And on the positive side, um, marriage was created for your good to
Mm-hmm.
help make you holy. Um, and so, as you two work towards Christ likeness and greater holiness, that will also work out for your good together. And so, I think that's important to remember as well. All right. I'm looking just to make sure we didn't get any questions that came in. We're good there. So, guys, thank you. We will be talking about the role of husbands this coming Sunday, and then Gary will be talking about parenting 2 weeks for the following 2 weeks. And so I hope you guys are looking forward to that. If you've not joined us, we have reunited in worship, and it's been really exciting. And this Sunday, we actually have our praise team some of our praise team is gonna play with us, and the band's gonna be there. So we're looking forward to that. And practice was really neat the other night. We got to get together and just pray and stuff. And so we're looking forward to it, and we look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday. All right, we love you. Have a great
Bye,
day.
guys.
Bye.